Right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the BRLSI. My name is Tony Symes, and I organise the monthly lectures for the Herschel Society and the BRLSI. The title tonight is Johannes Kepler, his life and work, and the lecturer is Nicholas Pallett. Now, the Herschel Society holds its lectures here with the support of the Bath Royal Literary and Scientific Institution. The Herschel Society brings together like-minded people who are interested both in modern astronomy and the historical contribution of the extraordinary Herschel family to this subject, and we would welcome new members. I put some flyers out on the seats, and there are more on the desk there. I have to tell you that the lecture is being recorded. For those in the room, if the fire alarm sounds, please proceed out the way that you came in and keep right until you come to a small patch of grass on Chapel Row. If it's all on fire down there, then an alternative exit is through the back door and down the stairs of number 18 and out that way. For those on Zoom, please stay on mute and with video off during the lecture. You can turn your microphone and video stream back on for the Q&A session. It's best, though, to put questions in the chat channel, which you can do at any time to be answered at the end of the lecture. Looking ahead, in March, we are contributing 2 lectures to the BRLSI's Extraordinary Women programme. On Friday the 1st, we have Elisabetta Strickland coming over from the University of Rome to give a lecture on Mary Somerville. She was someone who was a self-educated polymath, a really amazing woman, gave her name, of course, to Somerville College, and she knew John Herschel, so she's connected with our interests. And on Monday the 4th, we'll have Ursula Martin of Oxford University to talk about Ada Lovelace, the world's first computer programmer. Both of these lecturers have written books on their subject. Note that you can buy tickets for the whole Extraordinary Women programme at a discount. Another date of interest is Saturday, the 8th of June, when we're having an all-day conference on John Herschel. Well, back to tonight. Nicholas was introduced to me by Dick Bateman, who is a long-standing stalwart of the BRLSI and a friend of Nicholas. So in that case, I'm going to hand over to Dick to introduce Nicholas.
Thank you very much. Now, I know you'd be delighted to welcome tonight's speaker. Nick is no stranger to talks at BRLSI, being a member and a volunteer for a number of recent music group events, and is also a member of the Herschel Society. Nick studied maths, phys and chemistry at advanced level, took a science degree at Nottingham University, then promptly started a successful career as a professional musician, as you would, both in the United Kingdom and internationally. He has worked locally for both Bristol and Bath Educational Musical Services, is a multi-instrumentalist, a vocalist, composer, band leader, and not least a promoter of highly successful musical events in the local area. Tonight, however, Nick is reverting to his first love, science, and we'll be talking about one of his heroes, Dr. Johannes Kepler. And we'll answer the question, why has Dr. Kepler been called a weird genius? In his answer, Nick will tell us a story about the geographical and historical context in which Dr. Kepler made such historic discoveries. I know that we'll find Nick's talk as informative as it is interesting. Nick's agreed to answer questions after the talk, and we'll be having roving microphones, which will help our Zoom listeners, welcome those on Zoom, to hear the questions more clearly. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Nicholas Pallett.
Thank you. Good evening. Welcome, and again, thank you for coming along tonight and for giving me this opportunity to talk to you about one of the most fascinating characters in the history of science here in this celebrated institution, and especially on the 200th anniversary of the BRLSI. I'd like to welcome our Zoomers also from halfway around the planet Earth and also up in the Midlands. And there may be more. So welcome to you too. I think I'm correct in assuming that most people will, with an interest in astronomy, will, okay. Most people with an interest in, oh, okay. Is that right? I think I'm correct in assuming that most people with an interest in astronomy will know Johannes Kepler for his 3 laws of planetary motion and why they were so significant. What I'm hoping to reveal is that there is a lot more to this man's life and work, and a lot you may not know. To me, it's quite an astonishing story and a long and complex one, which I will try and cram into the 40 minutes or so. So I'd like to first of all have a look at the timeline, but we seem to have a technical problem. So I'll just carry on. It's important to recognize that Kepler's life bridged or straddled 2 quite distinct eras in the story of human knowledge. At least in the Western world and with hindsight. Figuratively speaking, he had 1 foot in the... Do I have to do this?
Protest going on.
Yeah, I think it's a delivery.
No, there we go. We're on track. Back one. Okay. Thank you very much. I want to reveal that there is a lot more to Kepler's life and work than the 3 laws of planetary motion. So let's first take a look at the timeline. Thank you. It's important to recognize that his life bridged or straddled 2 quite distinct eras in the stories of human knowledge, at least in the Western world and with hindsight. Figuratively speaking, he had 1 foot in the medieval world when it was assumed that the Earth was the center of the universe and that everything else in the sky, the planets, the moon, the sun, and the fixed stars, revolved around it. This is a view which has been held for almost 2 millennia, since the time of ancient Greeks, Aristotle, Pythagoras, and Ptolemy. In fact, this is known as the Ptolemaic system. And the other foot at the beginning of the era of modern experimental science, which of course Kepler's achievements played a crucial role. We see his lifespan in relation to the other great names of the time: Copernicus, Tycho Brahe, Galileo, and Newton, including Shakespeare, although not a scientist, but whose inclusion helps put him into context. Okay, let's look at the geography. Okay, this is from around the 17th century. I've got some different maps out on display, one especially from 1604, but because of copyright problems and picture source, we couldn't use that one. So this is a later one. This is from after the 30 Years' War. But it shows Europe as it was, and the area encircled by the red line is the Holy Roman Empire, not to be confused with the Roman Empire, which was a millennium before. The Holy Roman Empire. And that is the area which is now approximately the country of Germany. Okay, let's look at a more detailed mid-European map. This is a closer look at the Holy Roman Empire, and we see the towns in red are important places in Kepler's life and work. Weil der Stadt is a small market town just outside Stuttgart, and that was where he was born. The other place is Tübingen, where he was educated, his employment, and where he did some of the printing, and Regensburg is where he died. Prague in Bohemia is the capital. Prague is the capital of Bohemia and the capital of the Holy Roman Empire. Okay, what words can we use to describe Kepler? I hope the Zoom people can see that clearly as well.
Yes,
Well,
I can confirm that.
great, thank you. How to sum up this man? I would say it in these words: astronomer, mathematician, visionary, dreamer, writer, explorer, astrologer, Christian, and weird genius. I will justify that later on. Okay, 1571, Weilderstadt, district of Württemberg in the state of Swabia. This is a photograph taken about 12 years ago in the marketplace in Weilderstadt. Kepler atop his monument. Young man below him is my son. Kepler was born into a family in decline. What do I mean by that? Once a proud and noble family of the Keplers, one of his grandfathers was the mayor of the town. And there he is, you can see him, his statue in front of the town hall. 2 or 3 generations before that, one of his ancestors was knighted. But young Johannes' own father, Heinrich, was something of a ne'er-do-well, a brutal and uneducated man who worked as a mercenary soldier and was away for months at a time, once even taking his wife with him. And when left in the care of his grandparents, the young Johannes almost died from smallpox. The mother too, Katharina, had little to recommend her. By all accounts, a wiry and quarrelsome woman with an inquisitive mind and who dabbled in herbal remedies and so-called magic potions, gaining her an unfortunate reputation, as we shall see later. It's worth mentioning that an aunt of hers and Kepler's great aunt, also called Katharina, had been burned at the stake, accused of witchcraft or similar practices. You think that Ma Kepler might have learned a lesson. He had 3 siblings altogether, including Heinrich Jr., who was an epileptic child and took after his somewhat psychopathic father. As a child, Johannes was short-sighted, weak, sickly, and suffered from just about every illness going, thereby missing a lot of schooling, and must have had a pretty miserable time living with his extended family in an impoverished, overcrowded household. By the time he reached his teens, he had a lot to catch up on, and he certainly did, academically showing great promise. Now, thanks to the Lutheran Creed of the Reformation, the education system in the district of Württemberg had been reformed and schooling was free to all. It was almost a mini welfare state. And those boys who excelled, it was only boys, of course, would naturally be destined for the priesthood. This new religion just needed lots of priests. We know a lot about his early life because he kept journals, diaries, writing everything, almost to the point of self-obsession. Certainly a lot of self-analyzing. The Germans say in seinen Briefen, which is in his own pen, in his own writing. In seinen Briefen, he writes about his family life in detail, and finding he has a talent for astrology, does horoscopes for them all. Later on, this skill becomes a useful way of earning money, although he himself is skeptical, or ambivalent to say the least. This is a detail from a horoscope he cast for himself. You see the different ways he spells his name. This is normal in German. They're all his own spellings. Now let's take a look at those figures there. Conceived, born. How did he work that out? Well, what did his parents tell him? But that's what he wrote. But the point is, the contrast between his carelessness about the spelling of his name and his extreme precision about dates and times reflects from the very outset a mind to which all ultimate reality, the essence of religion, of truth and beauty, is contained in the language of numbers. Is that weird? Well, these days it would be autistic. Only 2 events in his childhood, which he later recalls and writes down, helped to relieve the misery of his childhood. One was the Great Comet of 1577. There's a depiction of it from Prague. It must have looked the same all over Europe, I would think. And the other one was an eclipse of the moon in 1581 when he was 9 years old. He wrote in his journal, "The moon became obscure, yet appeared quite red." In those days, such events were awarded ominous and religious significance. And on both these occasions, his parents wake him up and take him outside to witness these rare celestial events. They must have made some kind of impression on his developing mind. Otherwise, a fairly traditional and normal coming of age at the time of graduation and university. I'll quote again a couple of snippets from his diaries. 1592, age 21, I went into town and lost a quarter florin at gambling. On New Year's Eve at Kupinga's, which sounds like a nightclub, on New Year's Eve at Kupinga's, I was offered union with a virgin. I achieved this with the greatest possible difficulty, experiencing the most acute pains of the bladder. Let's move on. Michael Merslin, to pronounce it, Michael Merslin was a professor of astronomy and mathematics and a very important figure in Kepler's education. They remained friends and supported each other throughout their lives. He taught the young Kepler about the Copernican system, the new idea which put the sun and not the earth at the center, the heliocentric universe, an idea still considered a heresy by the church in the late 1500s. It's through Michael Merslin's recommendation that he is offered a teaching post. Now aged 22 and with a BA and an MA already to his name, Kepler was partway through his theological studies when this opportunity came up. It was a huge decision for him, and he took it on the understanding that he could return to his studies in a year or so's time. He never did. So Kepler, taking the best part of a month, he travels to a place called Graz in present-day Austria to teach maths and astronomy in a Protestant seminary school where his duties also include the drawing up of calendars and horoscopes. Well, when he was there teaching, he never had many students, often none at all, leaving him plenty of time for speculation and exploration, especially in the new exciting idea of Copernicus, which he considered to be the truth. This is from the Kepler monument in Walderstadt, and there's one of Copernicus. We had no problems with copyright for that because I took it. So imagine one day, therefore, attempting to teach basic geometry to a group of, in all probability, disruptive and bored teenage boys. Basic geometry. I hope that's clear to the people on Zoom, because it's a faint. I drew it myself with okay, so I drew it with a compass and ruler. So he's teaching basic geometry, and he has this eureka moment. You see, there are any number of symmetrical two-dimensional shapes which fit perfectly inside and outside of a circle. There's the equilateral triangle, there's the cube, sorry, the square, I'm getting ahead, the square, the hexagon, etc. Any number. But when it comes to three-dimensional or solid symmetrical objects, it has been known since antiquity that there are only 5. No more, no less. 5, only 5 perfect or regular solids. They're known as the Pythagorean or Platonic solids. Okay, there's a diagram of the allusion to the classical elements, which was a medieval way of thinking. I'm going to ask if anyone can name one of, because they're a bit out of shape, aren't they? Anyone name one of the 5 perfect solids? Anyone name just one? The icosahedron. Very good. Hey, well done. Yes, we've all got them. Tetrahedron or pyramid, right. This is a dodecahedron. 8 pentagons. I think I'll have to shine a light on that. There you go. 12 pentagons. And the icosahedron is the next one up, and that's 20 equilateral triangles. So it's very good, very good. Well done, thank you. These are the solids which would fit inside and outside of a sphere. So his mind probably works something like this. There are 6 planets, because it was before Herschel. Okay, there are 6 planets, including Earth, and therefore 6 spheres on which each planet travels around the sun. Something had to determine the relative distance of each planet's orbit. Obviously, the creator, God, whatever, would have arranged it so that the 5 regular solids fit exactly between each sphere. Otherwise, why 6? The planets must be separated from each other or fenced in by the solid figures. Thus, between Saturn and Jupiter, you've got the cube, and between Jupiter and Mars, the tetrahedron, etc., etc. If you choose the right solid between each pair of planets, then they are at the correct distances approximately. Ta-da! The mystery of the universe solved by a 24-year-old schoolteacher in Graz. It was wrong, of course. But it was the big idea which propelled him ultimately to make his monumental discoveries. This is the basis for his first book, Mysterium Cosmographicum, or The Cosmic Mystery. So he gets time off from teaching and returns to his hometown to arrange publication of the book, and decides to try and impress the powers that be by building a model of the solar system in the form of a massive drinking vessel made from silver, copper, and other metals. He gets totally carried away with this. It's a crazy idea, a vanity project. I mean, it probably kept falling apart or something. It was a disaster. He wanted to present it to the Duke of Württemberg, but it was a disaster and eventually abandoned. But there is a model of it in the Kepler Museum in Walderstadt. And there we are, there's Louis again. And we're going into the Kepler Museum, and you weren't allowed to take photographs. So luckily we've got that one. Despite this very small setback, he has begun his great quest to see into the very mind of the Creator. To see into the mind of the Creator. If you look up the word weird in the Oxford Dictionary, the definition, the original definition, I know it means something different nowadays, weird, supernatural, unearthly. So that fits. To see in the very into the very mind of the Creator. But meanwhile, he's a 24-year-old male and he needs to find a wife. Well, being so busy with his work and his book and traveling back and forth to Graz, some of his friends and colleagues decide to help. They introduce him to one Barbara Müller, aged 23, and daughter of a wealthy mill owner. She's been married twice before to older men, both of whom had died, and is left with a young daughter. Well, she'll do, he thinks. Barbara, that is, not the daughter. And goes through the customary procedure. But then negotiations go on for months because of doubts as to the suitability of the match. Both father and daughter are concerned about his prospects as a lowly schoolteacher. But eventually conditions are agreed and a date for the wedding is set. There they are, about the time of their wedding. Then, according to our hero, with his talent for astrology, the day itself had a gloomy horoscope. The wedding will take place under a calamitous sky, he writes. Well, the years which follow only confirm his pessimism. Barbara is forever sulky, resentful, often angry, extremely possessive of her wealth, and complains of being married to a stargazer. She understands nothing of his work. reads nothing except her prayer book. To quote Kepler, she gives birth with difficulty, yet she is consumed by maternal love. As for me, not much love came my way. Nevertheless, the couple produced 5 children, only 2 of which survive. I should mention their first child was a boy, and he was born with deformed genitals. This reminded Kepler of boiled turtles in a shell, and he put this down to this being his wife's favorite dish. So they didn't know all about biology then. Okay, the marriage lasted 14 years. Barbara died aged 37 with a distraught mind. But he wasn't unkind to her, and he never called her a fool. But he kind of reinforced his belief in his own powers of prediction. Or of course, it might have been a self-fulfilling prophecy. His first book, Mysterium Cosmographicum, brings a certain amount of fame, although his theories are rejected or ignored by some, including, surprisingly, Galileo. Undeterred, he presses on with trying to find more accurate mathematical relationships between the positions and motions of the planets. One idea is to find a musical relationship according to the laws of harmony, with each planet emitting its own celestial hum in harmony with the others. And this idea is explored in a later book. In order to progress any further in his research, Kepler realizes he needs much more accurate observational data. And there is only one person in the whole of Europe who possesses such data, and that is the great Danish astronomer, Tycho Brahe. The rich, aristocratic Tycho has amassed a wealth of figures pertaining to the motions and positions of the moon and the planets, but being at work on his own pre-Copernican geocentric theory, jealously keeps this information to himself. However, he is getting old now and making little progress, so admits that he may need a brilliant young mind to come along and make better sense of his treasure. Again, at the Kepler Monument, statue of Tycho. The 2 astronomers, after much correspondence, suspect that a collaboration may be the opportunity of a lifetime. Tycho invites Kepler to come and work with him on his island off the coast of Denmark. His observatory is called Uraniborg. The island is HVWN, Hveen, or the island of Venus. It would mean a very long and costly journey for Kepler to go from Weilderstadt to Denmark. In the meantime, however, Tycho has a massive row with his patron, the King of Denmark, and is forced into exile. He and his entourage, which includes family members, staff, and cartloads of astronomical equipment, all travel south to set up a new Uraniborg just outside the city of Prague. Luckily, the Emperor Rudolf II, a big fan of science and philosophy, also lives in Prague, welcomes the great Dane, and gives him the title of Imperial Mathematician. That's a depiction of Kepler on the left and Tycho Brahe on the right, working together. The unmistakable mustache there as well. Apparently, he had a false nose, a nose made out of silver, which he lost when he was a young man. He fought a duel and lost his nose. So he was forever putting this ointment on his nose. I don't know whether that comes across in that picture. Right. He may need a brilliant young mind to come along and make better sense of his treasure. Oh, I've done that bit. Sorry, lost my place. So, Kepler, in the closing months. Tycho is now in Prague. Kepler, in the closing months of the 16th century, is faced with moving himself and his family to the new domain of Tycho Brahe to continue his life's work. And it's pretty much a step into the unknown for young Kepler. The politico-religious climate influenced his decision. things are hotting up in Central Europe as the Jesuits and the Lutherans, as the Catholics and the Protestants, become locked in conflict. There are rumors of torture and burnings. Kepler himself has no particular sectarian leanings. He is a Protestant, but as a seeker of truth, he feels he is above all such irrational bickerings. The chance to get away from it all to the more liberal state of Bohemia seems like a gift from God.
Sorry about this, everyone.
That's right. Let's have a look at those.
If you could apologise to people on Zoom via the.
We have a small technical problem, but we're back on track. Tycho, now, the association between Tycho Brahe and Kepler is not an easy ride. It doesn't get off to a good start. There are blunders, quarrels, mistrust, and misunderstandings. The two men are from completely different backgrounds. Tycho is much older than Kepler, who is often made to feel more like an apprentice than a colleague and treated with suspicion by Tycho's family. He rarely gets what he is promised in terms of pay or accommodation, and Barbara is always unhappy, of course. Tycho, being in charge, would assign work to his assistants. So far, everyone had failed to work out the orbit of Mars. When Kepler was given the task, he boasted that he could solve the problem in 8 days. In the end, it took him nearly 8 years. But it was this struggle that led to the discovery of the famous 3 laws. In total, the collaboration between the two lasted barely 18 months, with Kepler going back and forth from Prague to Graz. And then Tycho Brahe died. Now, it's quite well known, well documented, how he died. Do I need to tell everyone? Go on. Okay, they used to throw these lavish banquets. Tycho would give them in his castle, Benátky Castle. He would have to attend some in the city of Prague with all the luminaries, the important, noble people from the community, all the royalty. And of course, they used to drink gallons of wine. Tycho was always too polite to get up from the table and relieve himself. This went on for months. And in the end, he died from a ruptured bladder. On his deathbed, he lived for 1 more week. He took to his bed and he was in agony. And on his deathbed, in Kepler's presence, his last words were, "Ne frustar vixesse videa," which means, "Do not let me seem to have lived in vain," and then died. Just days later, Kepler was appointed as the new imperial mathematician. He must have made a good impression on the emperor. Fortunately, he was obsessed with numbers too. The decade which followed under the reign and patronage of Rudolf II was to be the most fruitful and fulfilling of his life. He still had to battle with Tycho's heirs, however, over rights and who discovered what, and he was still viewed as an imposter by some remaining family members. His intense focus and exhausting work on the figures relating to the orbit of Mars culminated in the first and second laws, not necessarily in that order. These are the subject of his new book, Astronomy Nova, the New Astronomy. The first law states simply that a planet moves around the sun, travels around the sun in elliptical orbits, not perfect circles. Not perfect circles. This was outrageous, revolutionary, pun intended. But how could anything in God's domain be anything but perfect? So it was unacceptable. And they weren't too sure about the ellipses. He played with various oval egg shapes. So the second law is the one where the evidence shows that a planet travels at varying speeds. When it's further away from the sun, it travels slower, and as it approaches the sun, it speeds up. What determines the speed? Well, if you draw a line from the sun to the planet, an imaginary line, that line will sweep out equal areas in equal times. Brilliant. How do you come up with that? But it was only really after the second law was established, the relationship in the areas, that he worked out that it was in fact an ellipse, because there was a special mathematical formula for an ellipse, and not a very eccentric ellipse. Mars is the most eccentric one, which is why it gave them so much trouble. Most of the planets, the eccentricity is not much, fairly close to a circle. Okay, let's pull a few threads together now and sum up. Remember, Tycho was set on proving his own geocentric theory. By giving Kepler the task of working out the orbit of Mars, he unwittingly disproved his own theory, allowing the genius Kepler to arrive at the truth. As Europe's greatest observational astronomer, working with the finest young mathematician by sheer fluke, really, paving the way for a new physics of the skies, a pivotal collaboration. And as for Tycho, he did not live in vain. Kepler's fame and reputation spread, even to England, and on at least one occasion, he was encouraged to go there, but he didn't. During his time in Prague, he met one of Tycho's cousins, a certain Frederick Rosencrantz, who, along with another cousin, Knut Guildenstern, were on their way to England. All right. Ring any bells? Yeah. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, two minor characters in a certain play Mr. Shakespeare was writing. Imagine if Kepler had gone with them. Around the time of the publication of Astronomy and Nova, an amazing new invention appears in the sky. Appears on the scene, rather. Appears on the scene. The telescope. Galileo had already turned one to the sky and discovered not only never before seen moving objects, but myriads more stars that can be seen with the naked eye. You've only got to turn a pair of binoculars to the stars and you see millions more in the background. The whole of the scientific community is abuzz with excitement. Kepler receives the news via one of his admirers, a great friend of his, a gentleman by the name of Johannes Matthias Wacker von Wackenfels. A beautiful name. I wish I had a picture of him. Inspired by this new instrument, itself a development from the single lens so-called Dutch spyglass, and having previously published a work on optics in 1604, Kepler embarked on an explanation of how and why the telescope worked. Went even further in the field, being one of the first to suggest how human vision might work. An upside-down image of the world projected onto the retina at the back of the eye, as in the camera obscura or pinhole camera. Such a pioneer, our man. Right, on top of all this, he was still expected to produce that which presumably he was being paid to do, the Rudolphine tables. The Rudolphine tables, a Herculean work of Herculean proportions begun by Tycho Brahe and completed by Kepler, which catalogues the positions of all the observable planets and stars and the rules of how to predict them. This became an indispensable tool in the art of navigation, and the most precise there had been to date, and of course dedicated to the emperor. It took Kepler 22 years to finish, and then another 4 to get into print, hampered by lack of funds, war, persecution, incapacity, and other personal issues. That's the frontispiece of the Rudolphine tables. So even though I'm getting ahead of events, 22 years, etc. Following the triumph of the first 2 laws, remember 1601 to 1610 was his great period. The year 1611 is a disaster. Epidemics and civil war break out in Prague and Bohemia. His favorite child, 16-year-old Friedrich, dies, followed by his wife Barbara soon afterwards. The Emperor Rudolf is forced to abdicate and is succeeded by Emperor Matthias, and he has little interest in astronomy or even astrology. Even though he's allowed to retain the title of imperial mathematician, Kepler is offered a new job, that of provincial mathematicus in the town of Linz in Upper Austria. Even here runs into trouble because of his refusal to conform to certain strict church doctrines. After Barbara's death, naturally, the 40-year-old, busy and celebrated mathematician needs another wife to look after him, his children, and run the household, the important work. Once again, friends and go-betweens come to his aid and recommend a number of eligible women, this time 11 in all. He approaches the choices almost mathematically, considering each prospective bride by methodically weighing up factors such as age, attractiveness, experience, intelligence, and above all, wealth. You can read about the process in Sein Briefen in the chapter called Computing a Bride in Koestler's book, and it's quite amusing, Computing a Bride. It's just puts one in mind of a 17th century version of a celebrity dating TV game. Broadcast on Sky TV, of course. One can only hope that some of the women had a say in the matter. Some of the 11 women. The whole process takes a year or so, and in the end, he picks number 5, Susanna Reutinger. An 18-year-old orphan girl with virtually no money of her own, and for no other discernible reason apart from he fancies her. Cupid's arrow. We can conclude that this was the right choice because we hear very little more about the marriage from his writings. And where Kepler is concerned, no news is good news. We do know that she gave birth to 7 more children, of whom 3 died in infancy. Well, we're now in the year 1614, and the next 6 or 7 years bring even more drama into Kepler's life. Circumstances and the events weave together simultaneously to bring his life's work to a climax. The backdrop of this is the infamous witch trial. His mother, Katharina, is arrested and accused of witchery. A common occurrence. Remember what she was like when Kepler was a child. A common occurrence at that time, the older women who weren't particularly well liked and who dabbled in herbal concoctions made her an easy target. The whole sordid business of accusations, claims and counterclaims goes on for years until it finally comes to court. The 2 brothers have to go and fetch him from where he's working in Linz and bring him home. You must come home, Johannes. They're going to burn our mother. In the end, the whole thing goes to court. Finally, after 6 years. In the end, she's acquitted, but only thanks to the exceptional reasoning of her educated and articulate son, and of course, who he is. He's able to show how ridiculous is the so-called evidence in her case, although he doesn't actually deny the existence of witches. He said, I'm not saying that witches do not exist, but this is my mother. She is old and feeble-minded. See, 1 foot still in the medieval world. She dies shortly after the acquittal, presumably through sheer exhaustion. Out of all this chaos and stress arose, ironically, the crowning achievement, the 3rd law, the book Harmonici Mundi, or Harmony of the World. The 3rd law sets out to describe the relationship between the time it takes a planet to orbit the sun, the period of revolution, and its mean distance from the sun. To put it as simply as possible, The squares of the periods of revolution are as the cubes of the mean distance of any two planets. In other words, the ratio of the period squared over the distance cubed is the same for all planets. Again, brilliant. See, the planets' periods have been known fairly accurately. That's the mathematical representation. The simple one is at the top. K is a constant. This, I assume, is post-Isaac Newton because you've got the gravitational constant and it takes into account the masses of both the star, capital M, whether it's the sun or any star, and the small m, the planet. So that must be a more recent representation mathematically. The planet's periods have been known fairly accurately for centuries, the second oldest profession. But the relative distances have been harder to determine until Tycho Brahe's accurate observations had provided the values for the distances using Kepler's work on the Rudolphine tables. We've got a little animation here, which is always a bit of fun. Mars and the Earth. There you go. Fantastic. It explains it in terms of astronomical units. One astronomical unit is the distance between the sun and the Earth. 1 cubed is 1. 1 also represents the period of 1 year. 1 cubed, 1 squared. Is that right? Yeah, 1 squared is 1. So it's the same, it's the relationship. Then you use the astronomical units. You astronomers will know what I mean. Right. Less than 1 week later, that same year, after the same year as the Third Law, 1618, begins the 30 Years' War, following something called the Defenestration of Prague. Do I need to tell you what the Defenestration of Prague was? It's where some Protestant ruffians break into the council offices and grab some Catholic officials and fling them out of a window of a high building. The 30 Years' War, an insane and devastating conflict which would lay waste to the area which is now Germany. Albrecht von Wallenstein was a wealthy duke, commander-in-chief and defender of the Holy Roman Empire, and who was addicted to astrology. Several years before in Prague, he'd been impressed by Kepler's skills in predicting his success on the battlefield, in repelling the Danes to the north and the Turks from the east, as well as accurately forecasting the weather, which must have been sheer luck. This is a horoscope from 1608 that Kepler did when he and Wallenstein first worked together in Prague. Right, that is a horoscope. Anyone understand that? Me neither. Not a clue. At least there are 12 signs of the zodiac. So Wallenstein, faced with a new conflict, Wallenstein is once again in need of guidance from the stars because he now has many enemies. Kepler plays hard to get this time around and reluctantly gives his services. The arrangement is a disappointment for both of them. Wallenstein is asking far too much and Kepler is too cautious. Remember his ambivalence to the dark art? On the one hand, he's saying his words are sortilegious monkey shine, nonsense. But then he says, maybe the skies have some influence on the formation of character at birth. Anyway, they fall out, Kepler and Wallenstein, and Kepler never gets paid. Interestingly, the horoscope he forecasts this time around for the warlord only goes up to the year 1634, and that's the year that Wallenstein is assassinated. He was pretty good, wasn't he? So, in Kepler's final years, it's almost as if the spirit of his restless and itinerant father has taken him over. He is desperately trying to finish getting the Rudolphine tables printed amid all the conflicts and setbacks. And this involves a lot of traveling, sometimes with and often without his family, mainly to collect money he is owed. But he also decides to resume work on an idea he began years ago. Somnium, or the dream, is a story of a boy. It's a fiction, a story of a boy named Duracotus and his mother, the unpronounceable Fjoxlhilda, who live in Iceland. She makes a living from selling magic herbal potions and mysterious charms to the sailors for their long voyages upon the northern seas. One day, out of curiosity, the boy opens a bag of his mother's wares and spills the contents. In a fit of anger, she sells her son to the sailor, and he does not return for 5 years, during which time he has learnt the art of astronomy from none other than Tycho Brahe in Denmark. Together, mother and son, on his return, the mother and son make up and are reconciled. They set out on a journey to the moon by summoning supernatural forces. It's a semi-autobiographical fantasy, but the story contains some remarkable insights regarding what conditions might be like for creatures who inhabit the moon, the extremes of heat and cold, how the sky and the earth would appear. And he even speculates on the pull of each body, how they might cancel each other out as the journey gets halfway between the earth and the moon, the two bodies. Now, gravity as such had not been realized or discovered or invented yet. It can be viewed as both as a first work of science fiction or a serious treatise on lunar astronomy. Sadly, he didn't have time to finish the book. That was down to his son-in-law, Jacob Brahe, who was a scholar of medicine, to complete and publish. In the autumn of 1630, he travels to Regensburg for a meeting in the hope of recouping some of the money he has invested and which he is still owed. With some outstanding printing jobs too, one can imagine his feelings of desperation. Stopping at an inn, he develops fever and falls into a delirious state of mind. They sent for several priests, but owing to Kepler's lifelong refusal to commit to either side, Protestant or Catholic, was probably not given the last rites. Many important people attended the funeral, and there was a huge meteor shower that night. Now, knowing the time of the year, we astronomers know that must have been the Geminids. But at a time when such displays were perceived as supernatural omens, it might have seemed that the heavens themselves were weeping for their interpreter. He was buried nearby, but the graveyard would be destroyed by the invading Swedish forces during the 30 Years' War. And he must have had descendants, but for the same reason, little is known. We can only speculate. So what's the legacy? A year before his death, Kepler had published a pamphlet warning of two up-and-coming celestial events. In November 1631, the transit of Mercury across the face of the sun, followed by, 1 month later, by that of the planet Venus. Because of telescopes, another new technology for observing sunspots, astronomers were able to watch these at the time almost exactly as predicted by Kepler, within a few hours. And all thanks to Kepler and the Rudolphine tables. It's a shame he just couldn't live a couple of years longer and witness these events too, witness this vindication. As for the three laws, Kepler himself did not fully realize the significance of what he'd done. For a start, he came up with them all by himself. Very often, discoveries and advances in science are made simultaneously and independently by two or more persons, as if there's something in the air. Examples are calculus, Newton and Leibniz, independently. Evolution. telecommunications. And I'm sure in the field of quantum physics, there must be lots of similar work going on. But in Kepler's time, there was no one else even close. It wasn't until towards the end of the 17th century when Isaac Newton came up with a theory of gravity drawn entirely from Kepler's three laws, even though at the time Newton did not fully acknowledge the debt he owed. Now, I've not mentioned Galileo much, hardly at all, in fact. He had his own problems and his particular run-in with the church was much more dramatic and has been written about extensively. Support for Kepler's work was sparse. And in the end, he had to retract, as we know. It's as if Galileo didn't take his German contemporary seriously at all. And it's not only because of Kepler's journals, but from his voluminous and prolific correspondence with family members and other scientists that we know so much about the life of this extraordinary man. I'm going to finish with a quote from what's considered to be the only serious biography by Max Kasper. I've lined some books up along there. You're very welcome to look at them afterwards. Any sheets of paper you can take with you, but please leave the framed pictures and the books and the CDs, if you don't mind. But make a note of them, and please, it's great reading, especially the Arthur Koestler book. Arthur Koestler, and the John Banville novel, the Irish writer John Banville, fantastic writer. He wrote a fiction. So this is the quote from Max Kasper's book, and I've paraphrased it. Whenever Kepler's name is mentioned, many people prick up their ears. The circle of his admirers reaches far beyond his achievements of the three planetary laws. It is the halo of his personality which draws many under his spell, the nobility of his character which makes friends for him, the vicissitudes of his life which arouse sympathy, and the secret of his union with nature that attracts all those who seek something in the universe beyond and different from that which rigorous science offers. In their hearts, they all quietly bear veneration and love for this exceptional man, for no one who has entered the magic sphere that surrounds him can ever escape from it. I confess to being one of those. Over the years as a musician, I've done a lot of work in musical theatre, from the West End, both on stage and in the pit, lots of Amdram and school productions. And I've often thought that Kepler's life would make a really good stage musical. Okay, not an obvious contender. Limited commercial appeal, I agree. When you think of Oliver, Les Miserables, Hamilton, maybe it's time for an astronomy musical. Well, this is my humble contribution. That's all I'm saying. If you're interested, please make a note of the website. And if you can advise or help in any way, or if you're interested, just get in touch. My email address is there. If not, if you think it's a frivolous idea, then at least if I've whetted your appetite and you go back to some of the literature, then I'll be happy. We've got to spread the word. My inspirations have all been the books here on display. So thank you very much for staying. Thank you very much to the Zoom people out there in the world. And I'd like to say a big thank you to Mr. Dick Bateman, for his invaluable help and advice on today's speech. Thank you very much. Put a lot of work in, Dick, I know. Bye, everyone.
Well done, Nick. Thank you, Betty. We're going to take questions. There's a question and answer session. First of all, Tony, have you got any? None in chat from Zoom. Come on, you Zoomers. Let's have some questions on the chat. We have microphones here. Please use the microphone to ask your questions. So that will then go around the sound loop for anyone with hearing difficulties, and also will help with the Zoom people being able to hear. So Paul, if you go to that side of the room, please, and Betty's on this side. Hands up for questions, please. We have a young man here who would like to ask a question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Can you turn it on, please?
Can you hear me?
Better,
Oh,
thank
right,
you.
Okay. I always think it's completely remarkable that Kepler met up with Tycho Brahe purely by chance. There was no real reason why they should have ever have met up. And had they not met up, we would not have Kepler's laws because he wouldn't have had the experimental data to check out his theories.
Yep.
Which Newton, I don't know, none of us would know whether Newton would have come up with his theory of gravitation had not Kepler's laws been discovered earlier. He may have done, but again.
He may have, yes, I agree. He may have.
Yes.
Done.
And the other point that you brought out, but perhaps not as clearly as it might have been done, that before the Newtonian period, which was the start of the maritime empires of Holland and England and other European countries, there was no occupation possible for an astronomer other than astrology. You could not make a living unless you cast horoscopes.
That's true. Exactly.
Is that your question?
Well, it's a comment.
you.
Well, that is,
You know,
It's a
that's very
comment.
true.
So,
Yeah, exactly.
Newton actually was an astrologer as well as an astronomer.
Yes,
And he was also a
alchemist.
alchemist.
No
And he was
spe- no
more
speeches,
magician than
please.
scientist.
Let's move on with, I'm sure we've got a lot of questions.
Yes,
So we need to have
You,
sharp questions,
Well, you
please, then we get more.
you've got the point exactly. Exactly.
But do you want that one answered? I'm sure.
No,
you
no,
do.
I'm just going to say, Galileo was a mathematician
Yeah.
and an astronomer. He was not an astrologer.
Okay. Well, but he had a lot of more problems with the church than Kepler had. And he was forced to retract the Copernican theory. I think Italy, the country which is now Italy, was probably slightly different culture. And you can make a living from teaching. That was probably the only other way. If you were an astronomer, then you know about mathematics and science, natural science, philosophy. You could make a living from teaching. But in where Kepler lived, it was a fairly lowly profession. It may not have been in Italy. And of course, patronage. You had to have the emperor or king or queen.
Just put your hand up if you've got
We've got
a
one here.
question. Yeah, if you've got a question pending, just put your hands up, please.
Would it be true to say that Kepler's laws are still in use today?
Well, they've laid the foundations.
In space flight, for instance.
Exactly. I mean, how
Yeah.
do they, I mean, obviously a lot more is known because of gravity. Remember, it was pre-gravity. And Kepler had he came very close to it. He talked about forces in the sun. I mean, the medieval belief was that the angels pushed the planets round, flapping their wings. But Kepler introduced the idea of maybe there is a force in the sun, but he didn't go any further, one step further into gravity. And it wasn't until almost a century later.
Very interesting sort of storytelling of a scientific story. So many congratulations and thank you for that. In respect of the Kepler's laws relating to relativity,
Right.
in fact, he touched on that, didn't he? Because when he talked about the movement of the ellipses,
Yeah.
and T2 being equal to T1, but
Yeah.
you know the space was very different. So that's all, you know, talking about relativity,
Yeah.
which would have given the basis for trying to understand the concept of gravity.
Precisely.
And of course, Einstein struggled with that as well.
Yes, indeed. Kepler has often been referred to as the Einstein of his day.
Yes, but
And he made these grand, huge leaps.
Einstein's struggles are still being worked out through the Webb telescope. Do you agree?
Good. Yeah, I do.
Hello. I've always known of the chap as Tycho Brahe. When did he become Tycho Brahe?
Tycho. Well, because
Whatever,
in
yes.
Danish, the Y is tu. We've got a housing development near us, HYGGE, Huga. Everybody calls it Higgy. It's Tycho Brahe. I know, it's the anglicisation. Patrick Moore used to say Tycho Brahe.
Oh, well, that's good enough for anyone. The young lady next.
Potentially a silly question. Why was there less communication between thinkers? Were there not universities in that age where they could meet up and talk about this kind of theory? Why was it just Kepler almost on his own?
Less communication
Yeah, it sort of
with other
I
people.
kind of imagine there would be universities at this age where they would essentially meet and discuss this kind of theory.
For our Zoom listeners, that question was, why was there not more communication between scientists in those days? Didn't universities link with each other?
Well, this talk was 45 minutes long. There's a lot more underneath, which are, I mean, if you're interested, The Sleepwalkers is the book, or Max Casper it's heavy going, very detailed. There's an American one there, which is just called Kepler, which is very informative, a little bit dry, but if you, there's a lot more I couldn't talk about. And John Banville, the writer, includes a lot of his correspondence, and some of it is with other scientists.
John Banville.
So, I mean, I just didn't have time to go into that amount of detail because there's a lot more underneath. Yes, he did communicate with scientists. And you can you can read about it if you're interested. I mean, make a note of the books, get them from the library or something. For those bits, really. John Banville, he wrote Dr. Copernicus as well. Very entertaining. Okay.
I have a question from the chat channel. It's Fran Bagenal. You'll have to repeat the question.
Yeah.
She asks, what music tells... Okay, this is the question on the chat channel from Fran Bagenal, who I happen to know lives in Boulder, Colorado, so some way off. And she asks, what music tells Kepler's story? Give us an example. I thought the music was proposed, actually, rather than...
No, I've written it. I've written it all.
Oh, yeah.
I've written the musical.
Oh, right.
An hour and a half. It's mini opera, I suppose. The reason I don't want to play it is because it's all me. I started it during COVID. I couldn't get anyone into my house to record. I couldn't get any other vocalists. I did it all myself. I'm not prepared to put that out into the world. I need a musical theatre company to do it. It's all right, you know, but it's all me. You can't tell who's singing what. I've got these parts where Rudolph's saying something and Tycho's wife saying something and Kepler saying something, and it's all my voice. So, but I'm just saying that it's written, ready to go.
Right. On that subject, I was in correspondence a few years ago with somebody from Yale University who wanted to write an opera about William and Caroline Herschel. I obviously need to ask how that project went, but so.
Well, I don't know whether Julia Golding's here tonight or is watching, but she wrote a play about Caroline Herschel, and there was a lot of music in that, but it was they used a lot of William Herschel's music. I once went to an opera. No, I didn't go to one. I watched an opera from Cambridge about the witch trial. It was a set piece, the witch trial, and it was so inaccessible. It was very difficult, inaccessible kind of operatic, atonal melodies. I couldn't understand anyone liking it really.
You're clear as a bell, don't you? Our next question, my good friend Fiona Bell.
My good friend Fiona. It's just the question. It's just that I'd just like to share with the room and the Zoomers that I've heard some of this amazing music from Mr. Pallett over there, who's very reticent about saying that he's written it, but it's absolutely beautiful. And even if he is singing all the parts, it's very cleverly written, and it's a very lovely set of musical pieces. So I would urge anyone who has any musical interest to get in touch with him, because it really does deserve to make it into even, a Bath event. It's superb. So
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you very much.
More questions? Yes,
Could you just, you mentioned Galileo in passing a couple of times, and in relation to his telescope, just jog my memory about when the telescope became a sort of well-received instrument of observation. Was Kepler ever able to use one?
Yes, he was waiting for Galileo to send him one, but Galileo just never replied to his letters. And so it was a while before he got one, and he thinks he could have made his own in the end. But Kepler had very poor vision, which is a bit of a handicap for an astronomer, really. It's somewhere in the books, but I can't remember now whether he actually used it. He did work out how the lens, the mechanics of it worked, how it magnified. But to tell you the truth, I'm not sure if he used one for looking at the sky. I doubt it, because he couldn't see very well. And I think it was Kepler's main talent was for the mathematics and the numbers. So it's a shame, really, isn't it? Shame he didn't live to see the transit of Venus as well.
I've got a question. Prince Rudolph was
Emperor.
Emperor.
Yeah.
Emperor Rudolph was made to clear off.
Yes.
Was he excommunicated, or was Kepler excommunicated?
No, Rudolph it was just politics with Rudolph II. His brother, I think, or cousin Matthias took over, and they just wanted him out. He was a little bit, Rudolph, almost like a George III figure, really, slightly mad. And I think he was just edged out. Kepler was excommunicated several times, it seems.
By whom?
By both the Protestants and when he refused to commit to Catholicism, and he wouldn't. There were certain. I don't know a lot about. I'm not very religious, but he just wouldn't confirm things like the communion. He wouldn't accept that it was the actual body of Christ. And he just thought he was. He believed he was a Christian, and he said, I believe in Jesus Christ. And I don't think by his last words, his epitaph, which came up there and I forgot to read out, and whether we could go back. I suspect that he didn't really hold with the idea of heaven and hell, because his last words, his epitaph was in Latin. It means, I measured the skies, now the earth's shadows I measure. Skybound was the mind, earthbound the body rests. There's no mention of an afterlife. So I suspect he was a Christian, in that he believed in Jesus Christ, but he wasn't interested in sectarian differences. And he never talked about heaven. To him was the skies. So he never talked about, mentioned the afterlife in his writings at all. It's kind of halfway house, really.
One last question, unless there are any other incipient questions. Thank you.
I was wondering if I could bring up to sort of philosophical issues with you. Um, That was a question. Thank you. So the first issue is his conflict with the church, both the Protestant and the Catholic. And my personal view is that because he was toying with the idea of the geocentricity, which conflicted with the church's idea of the, he was promoting solar centricity, and the church was, very sort of set in its way, thinking about geocentricity. So that's probably what the conflict was between Kepler and the other, Copernicus and others, with the church. Do you agree?
Yeah, yeah, strangely enough, the Catholic or the Jesuits were more accepting the idea of a heliocentric universe than the Protestants, strangely enough, and yet he was a Protestant
Really?
and
Yeah.
refused to commit to
Yeah.
Catholicism. So he felt it was above it all.
It's more politics than
Well,
philosophy.
exactly.
Yeah.
But what amazes me and that we're still fighting over things like this.
Yes.
Well, Northern Ireland isn't so long ago and is still there. Now we've got the Sunnis and the Shiites. I mean, 400 years and we haven't moved on morally at all. And yet science is.
No, the second philosophical thing.
Could we have another question, please, rather than say?
It is a question.
Yes, I'll ask the question because
May I? Thank you. The second question is, I don't know if you're aware, when you brought out the idea of the telescope, where did it come from? In the 13th century, there sculpture going back to the 13th century on a temple, Hindu temple, shows a woman with a telescope at her eye.
Really?
Yes.
Really? I
Yes.
wasn't aware of that at all.
Yes.
So
I can send you a photograph.
Okay.
Thank you.
A photograph.
Of the telescope.
Right.
Of the telescope.
Okay. That's very interesting. I mean, history is one of those things, isn't it? It can be interpreted and. Okay.
Right, yes. So Fran Bagenol in Colorado says, please let her know when you're performing the musical, because she's going to come over for it.
Great. Okay.
And
give me my details and I'll keep her informed.
and Robert Grotzinger asks the question, I've heard that the theory that Brahe didn't die of a ruptured bladder, but was poisoned by Kepler. Any thoughts on that?
Oh, yes. Nonsense. Don't believe a word of it. Kepler wasn't like that. Well, yeah, it would fit, wouldn't it? I want to get the results so I can advance my theories, but speculation, fanciful, I think.
Yes, right.
Good.
And we just have a comment. Being excommunicated probably didn't help his Christian faith, but that's not a question.
There was someone who hounded him to the end of his life, a gentleman, Daniel Hitzler. It's Hitler with a Z, from Linz, which is where Hitler's from. Daniel Hitzler, who just hounded him and refused to let him, wouldn't leave him alone, apparently. Anyway.
Well, that brings us to the end of this evening, and whereas many of us knew something about the laws of planetary motion, I think most of us have learned an awful lot this evening about the life and background of Kepler, which I'm very grateful, and presented in a most entertaining way. So let's show our appreciation of Nicholas Pallett.